Welcome to Barbecue Stories. Please like this video and subscribe to Barbecue Stories. We appreciate every single one of you and are so grateful for your support. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from, we'd love to hear from you. Now, let's dive in. The faint glow of the clock on the wall displayed 2:14 a.m. as Bob paced back and forth in the living room, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The dimly lit room was enveloped in silence, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator, a sharp contrast to the chaotic whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. Upstairs, the boys were fast asleep, their soft, rhythmic breathing serving as the only thing tethering him to the moment. His phone lay still on the coffee table, a silent and damning reminder of Sue's absence. This wasn't the first time she'd stayed out late, but tonight was different. A gnawing feeling in his gut, a primal instinct, refused to let him brush it aside. He had replayed her words in his mind countless times. Just a quick dinner with the girls, she'd said, planting a casual, dismissive kiss on his cheek before walking out the door. Hours later, her silence was deafening, more piercing than any excuse she might have mustered. Bob picked up his phone, scrolling through their messages again. The last one, a curt text reading, "Running late, don't wait up," did nothing to ease his worry. His heart ached as he stared at her photo on the screen, a snapshot from their honeymoon in Hawaii. She was radiant in the image, her laughter so infectious it seemed to echo even now. How had they fallen from that moment of unfiltered joy into this chasm of suspicion and doubt? He set the phone down with a thud, raking his hands through his hair. When the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel finally broke the stillness, his heart leapt. The headlights briefly illuminated the driveway before the car engine stopped. Bob stood by the window, watching as Sue stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She swayed slightly, her movements unhurried, as if the weight of her actions carried no consequence. When she pushed open the door and froze at the sight of him standing there, her face twisted into irritation, not guilt. "You're still up?" she asked, slipping her purse onto the counter as if she hadn't been gone all night. "Where have you been?" Bob's voice was low and measured, yet it carried an undercurrent of restrained fury. "With Beth," she replied casually, her tone dismissive. "I told you I might be late." "Late?" His voice rose slightly. "Sue, it's 2 a.m. You didn't call, you didn't answer my texts. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Rolling her eyes, she kicked off her heels. "Bob, don't be so dramatic. We had a few drinks, and I didn't want to drive back right away. You should be thanking me for being responsible." "Responsible?" he echoed, incredulous. "You think leaving me to worry all night is responsible? What about the boys?" "Oh, don't start with the boys," she snapped, her tone sharp as glass. "They were asleep the whole time. You're just upset because I'm not stuck at home playing the perfect little housewife." Bob took a step back, her words striking him like a physical blow. This wasn't the woman he had married, the woman who had once vowed to put their family above all else. He searched her face for any trace of remorse but found none. "You're slipping away from us," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his heartbreak. "From me, from the boys. Is that what you want?" Sue laughed, a cold, hollow sound that turned his stomach. "You're imagining things. I have a life outside this house, Bob. Maybe you should get one too." And with that, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving him standing in the dimly lit living room, alone with his thoughts. As her footsteps faded, Bob sank onto the couch, his hands trembling. He felt like a man trying to hold on to sand, his one solid life slipping through his fingers. He had given her everything, love, stability, the life they had both dreamed of. And still, it wasn't enough. He stared at the empty space where she had stood moments earlier, his mind racing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever was pulling Sue away from him, he would uncover it. And when he did, he silently vowed, he wouldn't just stand by. And yet, there was no sadness in Bob now, only unwavering determination. If Sue thought she could humiliate him, tear apart their family, and walk away unscathed, she was mistaken. The morning after his discovery, Bob made a call he never thought he'd need to make. "Wilson," he said as the familiar deep voice answered, "I need your help." Wilson didn't immediately ask questions. Instead, he simply agreed to meet Bob at the local diner. By the time Bob arrived, Wilson was already there, sipping his usual black coffee, his demeanor calm and no nonsense as always. "You look like hell," Wilson remarked, motioning for Bob to take a seat. "I feel worse," Bob admitted, sliding into the booth. "It's Sue. She's cheating on me." Wilson raised an eyebrow but let Bob continue. "And it's not just an affair," Bob added, lowering his voice. "The guy she's seeing, Leroy, he's a drug dealer. She's tied up with him in ways I can't even comprehend. If I leave her, she'll ruin me, take the boys, the house, everything. But if I stay," Bob trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know what to do." Wilson leaned back, his sharp eyes fixed on Bob. "Sounds like you're backed into a corner," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean you're out of moves." Bob looked at him, a flicker of hope sparking. "What do you mean?" Wilson set his coffee down and leaned forward, speaking in a low, deliberate tone. "If Leroy's a dealer, then he's already on law enforcement's radar. We can use that. But you've got to play it smart, Bob. Don't confront her. Don't give her any reason to suspect you're onto her. Let her think she's in control." Bob nodded, his jaw tightening. "I can do that." Wilson smirked. "Good. Because once we catch them in the act, it's game over." The plan was set in motion with precise efficiency. Wilson used his connections to secure a warrant, and with help from a contact at the cable company, they discreetly bugged Bob's house. Cameras and microphones were carefully placed in areas where incriminating activity might occur. For weeks, Bob played the part of the clueless husband. He smiled at Sue, indulged her late nights, and feigned disinterest in her whereabouts. Inside, however, his fury grew with each passing day, fueled by the promise of justice. Meanwhile, the recordings began stacking up. Wilson's team captured everything: Sue's phone calls, her whispered plans with Leroy, even discussions about drug deliveries. The evidence painted a damning picture, and with every passing day, the trap tightened around her. When Sue casually announced a girls' weekend, Bob knew the moment had arrived. He kissed her goodbye, watching her leave with a calm detachment. "Let her go," Wilson advised later that day. "We've got it covered from here." Bob spent the day with his sons, making pancakes and playing board games as if it were just another Saturday. But when his phone buzzed that evening, his heart raced. "We've got them," Wilson said. "Drugs, guns, everything. She's in custody." Bob ended the call, a grim smile tugging at his lips. The woman who had betrayed him was finally facing the consequences of her choices. But it wasn't over, not yet. Late that night, as Bob was tucking the boys into bed, there was a knock at the door. His heart pounded. This wasn't part of the plan. When he opened the door, the nanny stood on the porch, her expression serious. "The sheriff asked me to watch the boys," she said. "He thought you might want to come to the station." Bob thanked her and quickly grabbed his keys. As he drove to the sheriff's office, his palms were slick against the steering wheel. When he arrived, Wilson was waiting. "She's in interrogation," Wilson said, gesturing toward a hallway. "Thought you might want a word with her." Bob followed silently, his steps heavy. Through the glass, he saw Sue sitting in a holding cell, disheveled and fearful. For a fleeting moment, sympathy stirred in him. But then he remembered, the texts, the lies, the betrayal. Wilson handed him the phone. "Talk to her. Hear what she has to say." Taking a deep breath, Bob picked up the receiver. Sue snatched the phone on her end, her knuckles white. "Bob," she began, her voice trembling. "You have to get me out of here. This is all a misunderstanding. The drugs weren't mine. Leroy, he set me up. You know I'd never." "Never what?" Bob interrupted, his voice icy. "Cheat on me. Lie to me. Bring a drug dealer into our home, our bed." Sue's face crumpled, her eyes wide with genuine fear. "It wasn't like that," she whispered, tears streaming. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was lonely. You were always working, and I—" "Stop," Bob snapped, his tone cutting through her excuses. "I don't want your justifications. I want the truth." Sue hesitated before breaking down. "Leroy said it was just business," she confessed. "He needed a place to hide some things, and I didn't think it would hurt anyone." Bob's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You didn't think it would hurt anyone? You didn't think it would hurt me? Or the boys? You've destroyed everything we built." "Please," Sue sobbed. "For the boys. Think about them. If I go to prison, what will it do to them?" Bob's resolve faltered for a moment. But then he remembered the humiliation, the lies, the nights spent alone. "You should have thought of the boys before throwing it all away," he said firmly. "You made your choices, Sue. Now deal with the consequences." He hung up and walked out, ignoring her desperate cries.